want to focus on time travel, whether or not it actually can be done. Why am I doing this? Because in my new book that I'm working on is going to be a handbook to the supernatural. And part of it will actually go into conspiracy theories. Now, the aspect of time travel came to mind when we had all of those mysterious videos come online where people were claiming they were part of a top secret time travel program, how the photos of the future came blurry because of the effect radiation from time travel and blah 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 blah. I'm skeptical on the whole matter, but I try to remain open-minded. So, in this book, we're addressing a letter to a time traveler. And in this letter to the time traveler, we're going to ask they leave a copy of the book that is not finished, is not published in any way, shape, or form. It solely exists on my computer and my backup drives. So there should be no way, unless somebody is hacking and making up a whole bunch of bullshit, no way they should have it. Now, Stephen Hawking actually did something similar to this, where he sent out invitations to a party for time travelers. But the thing is, he sent invitations out. Where's my fucking big eraser? Where'd that go? Oh, I'm always losing shit. Lost my mind before I was even born, so don't even try asking about that. Anyway, back to Stephen Hawking. There was an issue with how he did it. He sent the invitations out, having told no one about the idea in the first place, most likely. Because that would be the smart thing to do. Having told nobody about the invites, nobody about the little experiment, until the day after. Now, why do I say this is not a good idea? Stephen Hawking, one of the most brilliant minds in the world. Well, here's the thing about traveling through time. It's not like this, where we're moving through, everything is predetermined. What happens is what always would happen. Realistically, time is a bit more like this. And that is where the confusing part gets in for a lot of people. See, the way time moves, we can think of it a lot like water as a visual aid. Water will simply move downstream depending on whatever gets in its way. The path of its travel might be diverted through canals, rivers, lakes, underground pathways, things like that. It can also be altered through man-made intervention. It slightly altered through fish that are actually in the water, though it's slight and probably barely even noticeable, because it will eventually correct itself through a smaller object like that. But inevitably, it does bend. It moves around the objects that are in its path, and the more we move around, we're essentially altering it. Now, for those of you who don't realize, I'm not a small guy. I'm 6'7". Last time I measured my weight, I was about 340 pounds. Trying to lose a little bit of weight for health reasons. Nothing severe. Anyway, bigger guys like me tend to experience time slower just because of how it moves around us. It's a fraction of a second, probably hardly be even noticeable, but bigger guys tend to experience things time slower. Tends to move a little bit different for us. This is also due to the fact that because it is actually estimated, there was a study done on this, that because we're so big and we have so much mass to us, the nerves in our system take a little bit longer, not much, just a little bit longer to reach our brain in order to realize what's going on. So there's a couple different factors there. Smaller objects, smaller creatures, beings, items, what have you, they experience time a lot quicker. As both part of the neurological thing I mentioned and the fact that there's not much to them to bend around. So, technically, time can technically move like both of these. If there was nothing in existence, if there was nothing more than empty space and free flowing time, it'd be a bit more like this. But because there's a whole bunch of shit in the way, like little rocks, little fishies, people, time gets altered through every action. And this is a part of the thing I want to go into. Now, every action we take creates a slightly different pathway. If you say, for example, you go to throw a bunch of pebbles into a river, chances are you get a little splash. The current will go on a little bit, but then it'll eventually correct itself because that object is not that big. Now you say you get a loader, big old construction machines, haul big ass boulders, and throw them into this river. Technically, you can stop time altogether, but you're going to need something big. Now, the water has to stay in constant motion. If something's still feeding it in, if something's still feeding it, if nothing cuts off over here, the water's still going to overflow and still try to move around it, try to move under it even. Then that creates even more deviations. So it's a complex thing. Now, with time travel, the idea, here we'll just erase our little playthings here. Go ahead and leave that boulder there, just for illustration purposes. Now say this magnet right here, I'm only using it because it's right here, is our time machine. And our time machine starts where we have this boulder. And say we want to move to a certain time. You know, like the Hitler paradox, where if you go back in time and kill Hitler, will it stop the Holocaust, or will someone worse come along? The fact that we actually travel through time, the pathway is already diverted. Now, the issue with Stephen Hawking's experiment, using this model right here, the issue is that he was right here. Okay? Say this is time frame is the day after when he sent out the invites for the time traveler party. He's already experienced. He's already in a timeline where they did not show up. Now, let's say someone actually were to show up. That, again, creates a different timeline. I'm going to have to erase this in order to make some room. And might see some modifications in post to help bring this out a bit more. So, why am I saying that? Last time you see this, the post application is already done. Sure, where'd it go? Un momento, ahora. Okay, I'm back. We'll just use a dirty sock. Alright, so, the issue with Stephen Hawking is that he already existed in a timeline when the time travelers, let's use the magnet again, didn't show. Now let's say we get to a point where time machines are readily accessible and there's no rules, regulations, none of that. So, travel through time, the day of the party. Party! Woohoo! Now, an entirely different timeline is created. Sorry, I'm looking at my computer to make sure everything looks good over there. So that's part of the problem. My experiment is going to take a few different things into consideration, which I'm going to explain to you now. I know I'm kind of rambling right now, but just work with me, okay? By the time you see this video, 2 of the experiments will already have been completed. So far, it's not looking good. I proposed 3 different tests off of how time travel may seem to work. And I'm going to try to avoid going too much into, string theory and the dimensions of the overall universe. But I will have to touch base on that. So, work with me, okay? Because if I go into more detail about those things, it's going to be a much longer video than it needs to be. So, there were 3 tests. As I am recording, and I will give you an update soon on whether or not one of these tests is successful, I gave 3 tests. Now, as the time moves on, how we experience it, I'll probably add more. But right now, there's only, get rid of that ugly thing. That looks better. Yeah, my handwriting is not the best. Shut up. Test number 1 essentially replicates Hawking's, where I set up a meet point on a day that's already passed. Let's see, we're going to put day 1, day 2. Essentially replicating Hawking's experiment, how he did it. Now, because nobody will know about this experiment until this video comes out, nothing happened. So, my next couple experiments. Experiment number 2 utilizes the idea time machines can move freely like a lot of science fiction works use. They're not limited by time and or space. Meaning, say, I live here in Idaho. Glorious drawing, ain't it? In 2019, and I wanted to visit Texas. Oh, I am so sorry, Texas. I only say that because I know a few good people there. In the 1800s, for whatever reason. I'm just throwing out shit right there. Essentially, the time machine can just boop, like that. Should just simply be able to transport me there. So, like the first experiment, I set up a meet point. Now, the person didn't actually have to meet with me. All I asked is that I should have mentioned this earlier, but all I asked is they leave a published copy of the book that I'm writing right now. And part of that book will actually include a few journal pages, which is more for the reader's self-exploration type thing. But you'll understand more when it comes out. As for when, I'm not going to give an exact date quite yet. Let's just say right now the book is at 560 pages and nowhere near done. So just to give you a rough idea. But anyway, I set up a meet point somewhere I would be during my regular routines. There's not any special deviations whatsoever in which could tamper with this experiment. The idea, here, let's actually, experiment number 2, I write down the terms, then set it up to where time traveler would meet on a specific day and leave me the book in the spot I described. This one currently in progress at the time of recording this video. Now this one might actually be a bit more complicated because it essentially requires the machine to be able to teleport itself not just through time but through space as well, which will likely make things a lot more difficult. Now, there's experiment number 3 has allegedly been done before, according to conspiracy websites. I believe it's the Philadelphia experiment, where the time machine can only move through time. Well, instead of using that, Idaho now to Texas in the 1800s example I gave, where instead of that, how should I put this? The time machine can only displace itself in time, meaning it'll reappear in how about this? Essentially, the time machine will pop up in a different spot within the same lateral line. Now, what does this mean? Say, now this magnet I used as the time machine before, let's say this is the motion of the Earth. And this little triangle thing, halo triangle thingy, that's our time machine. See, everybody gets in. Oops. Everybody gets in. Turn it on. Bam. It's gone. Traveling through time. Now say this magnet is the position on the Earth the time machine started. If it's moving through time and not through space, space moves on normally. Now it pops. Now, destination time is set. Time machine reappears in a seemingly different spot on the same lateral line, longitude and latitude. Depending on the Earth's position in time. Another way to visualize it is like idiots in the park doing tricks on their skateboard. Say, we're going to take the Earth right now and make it into a human being. Say some kids are in the park doing tricks on their skateboard. One guy kicks the skateboard towards their friend, thinking that their friend isn't going to be able to jump in time, trip, fall on their face, maybe bleed a little bit. It'll be messed up a funny joke. The other friend kicks the skateboard. The skateboard is the Earth. And this is our time machine right here. All of a sudden, that's not good. That is horrible. So we have two kids. Boop. They're goofing around on a skateboard, kicking it back and forth to one another, trying to come up with a new game. I don't know. First kid kicks skateboard, moves forward in time. Kid jumps up over the skateboard, then comes back down. Essentially, the time machine will return in a position relative to where the Earth moved through time. Now, the Philadelphia experiment where military was testing cloaking technologies, allegedly there was this big bright light, ship went invisible, appeared somewhere else, and some of the crew members seem to be missing, disappeared. Some stories I've read, they seem to be fused into the ship itself. That seems to be one of the more likely examples, if not the more primitive versions of a time machine, so to speak. Because, say this dot is our three-dimensional world. The circle around it is time. The fourth dimension, according to superstring theory, is believed to be time itself. A measurement of how things move, change, and grow over time. It is possible that a time machine may only be able to move itself into a fourth dimensional space while the world is moving on its own through the fourth dimensional area. Now, we won't be able to see this. We may experience time through aging. However, we are only three-dimensional creatures who see things relatively in a two-dimensional space. The time machine will seemingly disappear as it's moving through time. Now, if it wants to displace itself, it's got to be able to figure out mathematical. Essentially, it's got to have one hell of a GPS system on it Not that it's impossible, but the early models of time machines may only be able to move through time itself and will appear somewhere along lateral lines of the Earth if we don't factor in the motion of the Earth through space itself. Because the Earth is not necessarily moving around the sun like this. It's a bit more this. Our orbit around the sun varies. But at the same time, we are also moving with the Milky Way galaxy, and we're also moving through the vastness of space as the universe is seemingly expanding. Now, some models are actually indicating there might be cracks on the very outer rims of the universe, areas we cannot see with our current technology. It may not be able to see for millions and millions of years. But we're going back to this. I know I ramble. Work with me. Essentially, the Earth doesn't necessarily move in a circle around this, just move in a circle around the sun. But going with that alone, we also have to consider, will the time machine move itself in the fourth dimensional space? Would it place itself there? Could it be possible for the time machine to reappear somewhere where the Earth isn't in its orbit anymore? One thing you got to consider. But if none of this matters, the third experiment, which goes back to say it's somehow able to fixate itself on the Earth itself. It's not going to accidentally pop up somewhere in space. These involve a lot of calculations that I am not smart enough to figure out. My lady friend, she might be able to beat me to it, if I'm being completely honest. Look at that. Look at myself. Now, if by some chance, say the Earth gravitational pull is enough to essentially tether the time machine to the planet's relative position in space. Test number 3. Essentially, I give them a few different points in which they mail the package to me if they can't figure out the exact positioning of how the time machine would reappear. They essentially mail it to one of these positions. If test number 3 is what unfolds, now that scheduled like seemingly everything else in my life right now on Friday the 13th, which may not be a wise idea, but we'll see. If this is the outcome that comes forward, they're instructed to send the books either to myself or to news media, the local press that I've actually done interviews with in the past. Now, I'm going to acknowledge, just like with everything else, I could be completely insane. I could be completely wrong about all of this. I acknowledge that. That's going to be the conditions of the time travel experiment as we see it right now. Because as far as all those videos that have popped up, I don't believe a single one of them is true. Now, for extra credit, for those of you. Now, there's actually another theory in which dictates none of this shit might work. I want to go into. And why did I throw my dirty sock over here? It could be possible that the time machine itself, even, let's say for the sake of argument, let's say it can move freely through space. Let's say it can move, it is tethered just enough to the Earth so where it doesn't pop up in space somewhere and we have to go send a rocket in order to get it. Let's say all of this factors in. What if the time machine can't travel through the past because it had not existed yet? Particles of light have been known to act quite funny. In fact, Albert Einstein said some of the actions that happen on the quantum level are rather spooky. If we want to achieve faster than light travel, if we want to be able to move through time, we have to get our time machine to act just like particles of light. Now, this is where things are going to get a little bit more confusing, but work with me. Particles of light can seemingly appear in more than one place at once. They call this superposition. This little cluster here is one particle. Now, it is possible. One possible theory I have, and I believe there's actually been some thought experiments. Some people have contemplated on trying to figure out how to test this. They've actually tried to test this, but it's hard to say because when we go into the experiments into this level of the universe, the simple act of looking at it seems to change the outcome. That's the freaky part about all this. It's very, very shy. It may seem happy and outgoing when things nobody's looking, but the second you look at it, it just shuts down on you. Not literally, but same basic concept. One of the ideas that I am proposing, and I'm pretty sure someone already beat me to the punch, that I'm considering for the book, and why time travel might be kind of pointless if we want to travel to the past. It is because the time machine, I believe this kind of looks like one that's described by Orson Welles. The time machine, here, let's put a little clock face on it, cannot move past the limits of its own existence. It may be able to move forward in time, no problem. But as far as it returning to a point before it was created, that might be difficult. Let's see. Say you want to go to a new store that's opening up. Our everyday life, you can just go to that store, right? Do your shopping, look around, whatever you want to do. Now let's say we had access to a time machine. And this is something that you might expect some millennials to do. Some millennials who wouldn't know what time it is by looking at my little drawing right there. And yes, I'm talking about people my own age, but I know how to fucking read an analog clock. Now let's say you traveled through time and you wanted to visit that exact store. However, that store literally was just barely built. They took only like, say for example, it only took about a month in order to get it up. Everything installed, ready for customers. Are you going to be able to go to some place that doesn't even exist yet? That's my logic for it. The time machine may not be able to move past before it was created. Essentially, light particles cannot move past any point in which they're not created. So, in theory, if we wanted to try to use a time machine to figure out what the hell happened before the universe was born, we may not be able to do it at all. We might not be able to move past the Big Bang. Unless our machine is configured to move through the fifth dimension. I don't know what it is, probably not important. Now, essentially, if the fourth dimension is in fact time, say you're born here, you continue to exist through time on this world of ours. Your conscience, say your brand new soul. More factors that I won't go into to keep this video under an hour. I'll probably chop out a few things. You cannot. Your physical existence may be limited to from your birth until your death. We're not factoring reincarnation. We're not factoring in any of that. Now, say you got a time machine. You had some sort of time traveling superpower. There's nothing before this for you to be able to travel to. Now, you might argue, yes, maybe your parents are there. It is possible that you will not be able to travel in the body you have now without you at least being conceived inside your mother's womb, or those little weird fish tank looking thing, artificial womb looking things that they have developed for people who may not be able to carry children. Now, some of you who know my story may be wondering, what about Olivia? Those of you who followed me for a while know the story. Essentially, I tried to commit suicide at one point in my life. Possible archangel, of all things, may have intervened and brought with him a little girl who may in fact be my daughter. I won't know for sure until the day I end up in a delivery room whether or not she is in fact my kid, but let's say for her now she is. Why I've called the situation the Olivia paradox. Because people who have often seen and interacted with spirits of their unborn children, children who were able to be born in this life, no miscarriages, nothing like that. They were able to be born happy, healthy babies. If Olivia was found by the moment she was conceived in her mother's womb to the point she died, how was she able to come help me? Part of the Olivia paradox. Now, it is possible that the archangel may exist outside the fourth dimension. Because by the time we get to the fifth dimension, we get to alternate Earths with similar star conditions. Slight variations between each one. Michael may exist in a space where he can see all of this and more. So therefore, because he has existed, likely before much of this was created, and probably will exist long after, his limitations are seemingly non-existent. If Michael was possibly a sixth or seventh dimension being, he could go to Earths where star conditions were different. It may have started earlier, may have started later. He could see it all. Considering his standing, it's possible. So, which means, say someone who was born in the year 2032 grows up, gets a ride in a time machine when he turns 18, so by 2050. The time machine itself existed since 2026, since that's what some of the conspiracy theories say. Because that kid catches a ride on the time machine whose parameters are larger than his own, it might prove to be an exception. He may be able to travel to points in time where he was not born yet. He may have not even been conceived. His parents might not even know each other exist. That's where that comes in. Confusing as hell, a little bit. My head actually hurts a little bit from explaining it. So, that is what we're working with here. We're essentially messing with shit when it comes to a lot of paranormal stuff, and I mean not just time travel, I'm talking ghosts, UFOs, all of that. We may in fact be dealing with things that we have no clue how to measure yet. And in fact, this might sound like some sort of ranting of a crazy conspiracy theorist, but if you actually go on the FBI archive website, the official site, official documents by the FBI released into the public about the UFO phenomenon, they actually say that contact has been made with extraterrestrial life, in which the ETs were actually extra-dimensional beings. They came from a world outside of the dimensions we know. And they were looking for some place new to reside. The FBI has released official documents dating back to the 60s and 70s stating that, yes, they're here. This shit is real. And you can look this up for yourself. I'll try to include a link down in the description wherever. But this shit is real. And we may actually be close to a disclosure event unlike anything we've ever seen before. Because you can actually interview, and I have actually done this, you can actually interview several members in the military who have been involved in frequent UFO sightings. Their higher-ups simply brushed it off. The reason why they keep that all secret is because they're scared shitless of beings who could travel freely, who have advanced their technology so much they could travel from Pluto to Earth. They can make travel from Pluto to Earth look like a 5-minute drive to the grocery store. These beings could make a travel from places our minds cannot even comprehend. Look like a 2-hour drive to Disney World. So if they're able to do that, what else are they capable of? And what would happen if they decided to wipe us all out? That's why there's cover-ups. There's actually regulation books that date back to the 40s, 50s that have already discussed protocols as for what the government should do if contact with extraterrestrial species was ever made. Rule number 1, keep it quiet. Because they didn't want us to be freaking out about what's out there. Certainly makes you wonder, doesn't it? But again, I encourage you all to be skeptical of every little bit. And in case I just don't decide to do any more videos like this, I want to simply say, I hope you all have fantastic holidays. Christmas, Kwanzaa, whatever you celebrate. Everyone of all lifestyles is welcome here. Be kind to one another. Give presents, not presents. Be there for the ones you love, instead of wasting away material possessions. Show love. Go after your dreams. We're approaching a new decade. So those New Year's resolutions you blow off, why not step it up a notch? Why not actually achieve something? Why not actually step it up because it's a new decade? I hope you all have safe and happy holidays. Travel smart, travel safe, be kind to one another. Show kindness to those who may be working on the holidays. And have a safe and happy new year, my friends. You'll start hearing from me again more regularly on the 10th of January. That is when brand new episodes of my radio show, my podcast, will start hitting the airwaves again. So be sure to look out for that. Like, subscribe, hit that little notification bell if you're watching this through YouTube, so you can make sure you see it all. A lot of exciting projects are coming together, my friends. Be on the lookout. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat. There's a list below where you can find me. Hit me up if you want to get news. Feel free to message me at any time. If you have questions, comments, concerns, corrections, All I ask is you be respectful to me, I'll be respectful to you, and be respectful to one another. The holidays aren't as jolly as they're supposed to be for a lot of people, but that's no excuse to not extend a hand of kindness. I think I'll stop boring you to death. See you next time.
Holy crap, I failed at keeping it under an hour.